here. So first off, real quick, just make sure that you are getting that nutrition article completed this week. Remember, you want to pick out an article that's approximately 2 to 5 years old. If it's a little bit older, I'm not too concerned about it, but just make sure that you have a good overview of all of the parts of it. You only need to do one internal citation when you initially introduce the article. You don't have to worry about repeatedly citing it throughout. I know where you're getting your information from. So yeah, any questions on that?
Yeah, I just have one question. So in the rubric, it says we need the permalink. Do we need that?
So for a permalink, if you have a DOI number, that'll work. If you don't have a DOI, which really all journal articles from the last 5 years have DOIs, but if for whatever reason you don't, make sure you have a website that works for it.
Okay.
The one thing, but that's a good point, Maggie, is that the one thing there, if you go on, say, your, on the GCU library and you get like the DOI from there, sometimes it will include like the GCU DOI information, and I hope I have this still.
Yeah, so I went to like the little site thing, like the little site button, and went to APA, and then it has like the link at the bottom that has a DOI number like at the end. I don't know if that works. Is that enough?
Let's see here, hopefully I still have this. Here we go. This here. So if you see this part specifically, that LOPES bit there from the library, do not include that, because this is specific to you individually, because you get this from you logging into your GCU account. If you submit this, I can't view it. Now, yes, I can just go and take this out, but the only thing you should include is this here. So doi.org/the DOI number. And then you do want to make it a an actual link as well. So this is only the, this is for APA 6, but APA 7, you want to use an actual live link now. All right, any other questions on that? All right, for quiz 2, this isn't going to be due until next Sunday, and that's going to cover really just chapters 4 and 3. Yeah. So it'll cover everything with digestion we're talking about, and then it'll cover carbs as well. Same format though. And then after well, I'm still kind of unsure if I want to continue doing the MindTap quizzes or not. It's much easier on me to do because I really don't have to grade anything. But I'm also considering if it's even feasible to do my the regular in-person quizzes, because you guys are split up. And not saying that you guys are all cheaters and whatnot, but I would have to make at least 2 versions of the quiz, because if you got it on Tuesday, very easily you could give that information to the Thursday people kind of thing. Which Tuesday people, I don't know why you would do that. That's so unfair for you. You're doing all the work of the Thursday people if you do that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? How did you like the first MindTap quiz? I mean, is that Is that something you want to keep doing for your quizzes?
I wouldn't mind because it was really easy to just log in and do, and it was a really short quiz. So
yeah, and the quiz time wouldn't change. It would still be like a 20-minute quiz. Granted, like in class, I'd give you as much time as you needed, but no one ever really needs that much time anyway. All right, so if you guys want to do that, we'll keep it that way. So that is fine by me. All right. When we last spoke on Tuesday, we were talking about our digestion, absorption, transport bits here. And initially, we talked about some of the different pieces of anatomy we want to look at. We talked about the different component parts of the GI system, and then kind of a brief rundown of kind of what happens in terms of our actual digestion. So first off, what are my two types of digestion?
Chemical and mechanical.
And what's the difference between those two?
So mechanical would be like physically breaking down the food, like chewing it, and then chemical would be pretty much the whole process of like going down the GI tract.
Yeah, you're pretty much right there. So mechanical digestion is just where you are physically separating or physically mixing the food via chewing it in your mouth or peristalsis in the stomach. There's nothing else added to that. Chemical digestion, so if you, let's say you removed all of your salivary glands in your mouth and you produced no saliva, you would still mechanically digest via chewing. Once you really add saliva mixing in there, you start getting chemical digestion going. But chemical digestion means, for all intents and purposes, you add a fluid to your food that isn't like something you drink. So a fluid from your body enters the food and starts breaking it down. You have primarily 3 points of where chemical digestion occurs. Where's the first one occur?
Do you mean besides saliva?
Yeah. And
well, the stomach.
well, the first one's in your mouth there, right? With your saliva. And what's the major enzyme that works there?
Salivary amylase.
There we go. And what does that break down?
Carbohydrates.
Yes. So salivary amylase, remember ASE suffix means an enzyme. That is going to break down carbs. That's why if you chew on something long enough, it'll turn sweet because your complex carbs are breaking down into simple sugars. Then you swallow it, goes down into the stomach, where we have our second round of chemical digestion. And what happens there?
Your stomach acid begins to like break down your food even more.
Yep. So you get nice concentrated hydrochloric acid in the stomach that is going to start breaking down all that food even more. And then where's my third round of chemical digestion?
Is it in the small intestine?
What part of it?
The duodenum, I think.
Yeah, the duodenum. You may also hear it pronounced duodenum. I don't really like it that way, but it is an acceptable one. And what enters there specifically?
Is it bile?
Yes, and what is bile?
I know it's produced in the liver and then stored in the gallbladder.
That is true. What's bile do?
It neutralizes.
What does it neutralize?
Stomach acid? I don't know.
There you go.
Okay.
So bile is an emulsifier. Remember, an emulsifier is our mixing agent. So when you get out of the stomach, it's kind of like a, it's a vomit consistency is what your food is. You get into the small intestine, mix it with bile, it combines eggs with flour, turns it into dough. So essentially, you're coming out of the stomach looking like eggs. You mix in the bile, it turns into flour. That's kind of the easiest way to think of it, even though it is kind of opposite way the ingredients would go. But I think you get the idea. Bile is very basic or very alkaline. It's going to neutralize your stomach acid. It's like, if you ever seen anyone eat a Carolina Reaper pepper or a ghost pepper? And Maggie, what does everyone recommend you do after you eat one of those?
Oh God, I don't know. Drink milk?
Why?
Because it's supposed to like calm down your stomach probably. It's probably a neutralizer.
I hope it's on here. It is not. So milk is actually close to the 7.5, 8 pH. It will help neutralize a lot of the acids from peppers. So peppers are all part of the family of capsicum, so genus capsicum, and they all hold the chemical capsaicin in them, which is something that makes you feel very hot. And you need to have a more basic edible solution that is going to help neutralize that. So when you eat a hot pepper, it's not actually hot itself. The chemical makes your body feel like it's hot. So if you were actually measuring your body's internal temperature, even after eating one of those really hot peppers, it would still be just the same temperature roughly. Like, there's not going to be any changes in temperature. Your actual skin temperature is going to decline greatly because you're going to sweat profusely. So your temperature at your skin is going to get a lot cooler, actually. And because you ingest something that makes your body hot, you're actually going to speed up your metabolism. So the spicier the foods you eat, the higher your basal metabolic rate goes. I wouldn't recommend, though, chomping down on like Carolina Reapers every day. You might not really like your life enough to really reap the benefits of having a raised metabolism. It's like if you're a smoker, smoking's great for your metabolism. Like, I kid you not, if you are a smoker, you smoke a pack a day, your metabolism on average is 5% higher than a non-smoker. How about that? So if you're willing to trade off, that smoker's smell, reduction in your VO2 max, a decrease in your overall aerobic capacity, and that whole COPD, emphysema, lung cancer thing, if you're willing to push those aside, smoking is like a hugely awesome option for you, especially if you're talking about, like, say, weight loss. Now, I'd also like to talk to you about the methamphetamine diet. How do you feel about tooth retention? Okay, so bile is going to neutralize our stomach acid, allows us then to send that out rest of the way, so it doesn't really affect our rest of our insides or rest of our GI system. And then in terms of, again, everything you need to know for the anatomy part here. So mouth, salivary glands, esophagus, the esophageal sphincters, stomach, pyloric sphincter, small intestines. You should probably know the pancreas, but we're going to cover that more later on. And the colon. So those are our big ones there to remember. The reason, first off, no one gives two shits about the appendix. Anyone that says the appendix is important either has had an appendectomy or is just lying to themselves. The ileocecal valve is important, but it's not something that we're so concerned about because there's not a whole lot of things that go wrong with that. So like we talked about with, say, like heartburn. When you have heartburn, your stomach acid is coming out of your stomach back up your esophagus. You have a faulty esophageal sphincter, or, well, upper esophageal sphincter. This is much more likely to malfunction than, say, this. If a valve doesn't malfunction, then it's not really worth kind of talking about. You talk about heart valves because of how important they are, and it's very common to have, like, say, a heart valve become faulty. What happens if a heart valve becomes faulty? What do you call that? Well, that's a little disappointing. So, faulty heart valve, heart murmur. There we go. Pancreas is definitely very important. You cannot live without the pancreas. But the major thing we're going to talk about with the pancreas is going to be insulin. So we're going to cover that a little bit later. Well, later in the term. But yes, the pancreas does release some bicarbonate. Bicarbonate, you may also know as baking soda. So it releases that in aqueous form. But again, that's not the major function of the pancreas. Remember what I talked about was the major function, the primary function of proteins? From like day 2. If you take protein powder supplements or have protein shakes, what are you trying to do?
Repair your tissues.
There we go. But protein also is going to be used to help, say, build hormone-like substances. It's also going to help with ATP or energy production. But we don't necessarily want it to do all that. But it does that still. All right, so any questions on the background of like the anatomy and all that good stuff? And remember, active transport versus simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion means you're free flowing. So if something is simply diffused, it would be like if I poured this pop into my mouth. The simple diffusion, oops, sorry about that. Simple diffusion says that this pop will go out of this hole without any problems, right? Don't need anything to carry that straight through. Facilitated diffusion would say that I have the cap on the pop, okay? And I need to take that cap off to get the pop out of the bottle. If I had active transport, then this cap is sealed. So I have not yet opened this for the very first time. Whenever you open a bottle for the first time, what do you have to do?
Break the seal on the lid.
Break the seal. I need to break that seal. So not only do I have to allow or get the cap off so that it will actually allow flow to occur, I have to break the seal to allow, first off, things to get in there so then I can transport it. And yes, active transport is a whole lot more complicated than that, but I would much rather you get a general idea of how it works now as opposed to, say, you know, like trying to overload you with just the minutia of it. And then we talked about where all of our absorption occurs. We get some absorption in the mouth, but the overwhelming majority, so about 90% of all of your nutrient absorption is going to occur in the small intestine. The majority of your absorption from the large intestine is going to be your fluids. Okay. So that brings us into the new stuff now. We're going to talk about this stuff here when we get into not only the micronutrient sections, but also when we get into the health section. But this is just to give you an idea of where nutrients are transported or how they're transported. You only have two transport systems in your body. You have the bloodstream and you have the lymphatic system. Those are the only two ways you can transport stuff in the body. Can't transport it any other way. Your bloodstream is by far and away the most important system in terms of being able to transport anything. You know, you transport, if anything, you transport oxygen through your bloodstream, right? So without the bloodstream, you know, you would die a very quick, miserable death kind of thing. The lymphatic system doesn't do a whole lot in terms of like major transport. It does do somewhat of a transport of your bigger fats and some of your fat soluble vitamins. For the most part, when you think lymphatic system, you're thinking like, say, white blood cell transport, because your lymphatic system does a whole lot more with your immune system support than it does for nutrient support or nutrient transport. But just so you know, those are your two systems you have, or your two transport systems you have. I'm not going to get too deep into, like, say, circulation, all that. You're going to handle that in many different classes. What you should know in terms of this is, again, that blood is slightly basic. So your blood pH is anywhere from roughly 7.2 to 7.4 roundabout. Even small changes to the pH of your blood can result in really, really drastic changes of your body. I'm sure you've all heard the term homeostasis, right? And what's homeostasis? So Kira, you nodded your head. What is it?
It's like making sure that your body stays completely balanced and that nothing, like there's no, I can't phrase my words this early in the morning. Like
No, you're right on there.
Everything's working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. So this is your ideal neutral balance line. Your body theoretically should walk the tightrope on there, but it doesn't. Your body systems deviate like this. Anytime you get too far away from baseline, your body corrects itself to get it back down there. And same thing, if you get too far away the other way, your body corrects itself to go back the other way. Homeostasis. Your body is pretty much like a really, really terrible driver. So you ever see people that will do the mime of driving, and they always do this, right? Could you imagine driving on the road like this? But that's how your body is with homeostasis. It just keeps overcorrecting itself. You know, it's hit that patch of ice and thinks that, oh, if I just keep swerving back and forth, that I'm going to eventually straighten that car out. Well, we'll talk about this more, because this same thing happens when, say, we're trying to lose weight. You know, when you lose weight, your body doesn't like it. Like your body likes you just the way you are. So it is a very big Bruno Mars fan. And anytime you try to change, either put weight on or take weight off, your body's going to resist that. So it really fights against, like, say, specifically against, like, say, weight loss, even weight gain to an extent, because even gaining weight, like, what happens if you just stuff yourself full of food? How do you feel?
You feel bloated?
Yeah, not good. I don't know any of you that really like that bloated feeling. I personally don't. I think it's terrible. But that's kind of one of your body's defense mechanisms against you doing more things like that. When you lose weight, your body says, okay, let's pump the brakes there. We're good right now. Don't try to, if it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So with your blood system, same thing. If that pH gets too high or too low, really bad things happen. I told you that a strong acid is just as powerful as a strong base or a strong alkaline solution, or alkaline compound, I should say. And that's true. So while your blood needs to stay slightly basic, it can't go too high, or else that's going to start deaminating proteins, which is going to specifically harm, say, your hemoglobin, kind of important for oxygen transport. But what you should know about about blood and nutrient transport is that your primary blood vessels, so your arteries and your veins, are only carriers. They aren't diffusers. If you ever go to a chiropractor, you'll hear this term they use called leaky gut syndrome, where they have this, I don't even want to call it a hypothesis because it's just, pseudoscience is probably a better word to use, saying that most all of your body's problems can be solved if I crack your bones, because it's going to make your intestines quit leaking fluids out of them, or quit leaking nutrients out of them. Absolute just hogwash. Now, mind you, I love getting my body cracked. I don't know about you, but the more pops I hear, the better. So I personally like going to a chiropractor whenever I can, because I just got to hear the sound and feel it. It feels good, right? But in terms of that doesn't happen. So back to this: your major blood vessels do not get rid of anything. They are solid. If I pour anything into an artery, it is not coming out. If it does, something has gone terribly wrong. If you have, like, say, an artery break open, say in your heart, like especially when you're coronary arteries, it's called a coronary dissection. That's the #1 cause of heart attacks in people under 30, is having a spontaneous coronary artery or a spontaneous aortic dissection, where literally your aorta or your coronary arteries break open without having first, say, an aneurysm. Kind of like having a stroke, but on your heart. Pretty dangerous there. All of your nutrient dissipation occurs at the capillary level. So in terms of your actual nutrient flow, the only thing that's important about your bloodstream and your blood vessels are your capillaries. Everything else is just a carrier. You cannot diffuse out of an artery or a vein. You only diffuse out of a capillary. And it's the same exact principle behind this here. You need to have, erase this with capillary. You need to have that because capillaries are so small or so thin that it allows this diffusion to occur. All these blood vessels here, those are all capillaries, because capillaries are not only the only ones that let nutrients out, they're also the only ones that let nutrients in. So it's no wonder why when you exercise, your body builds tons more capillaries. You don't really build new arteries and veins. Now, if you have, say, let's say you had a blockage in one of your coronary arteries, it's one of the arteries of your heart, your body will actually start naturally bypassing it. Like you'll actually start growing additional blood vessels off of there. The only problem is that those blood vessels don't go to the end point where they need to go. So you will see in most all people who have long-term blockages in their arteries or in their coronary arteries, they'll get actually more growth of like veins and arteries superficially than you normally would see. But the more the more capillaries you build up, the better your body is overall, because you're going to be much more efficient with nutrient transport, and the biggest nutrient that you should be trying to transport is oxygen. So I know oxygen is not one of those 6 dietary nutrients we talked about, but in terms of intra body transport, your oxygen is the most important thing for you. All right, liver. We're going to talk about the liver several times during the course of the semester here. I told you on Tuesday the liver is important for producing bile, which absolutely it is. To say the liver has one function doesn't do its service, or to say the liver has a primary function really doesn't do its service. The liver does a lot of stuff, and it's needed to do a lot of stuff. Now, to give you your saddening, Debbie Downer view of the day, if you don't get rid of, say, cancer from your liver, it's inoperable. The liver is the main the main hub for your GI and lymphatic system. It has this thing here, this hepatic vein, that is going to bring in not only tons of blood there, but it also helps to get rid of a lot of like toxins and whatnot. So last thing I'll harp on the day about terrible things is anyone that has a detox diet or does a detox, that is the absolute worst thing ever. Well, not worst, but it's such a misnomer. You don't take things, like you don't ingest things to detox you unless you were poisoned and you're taking a antidote, or if you had a snake or a scorpion bite or sting, you take anti-venom. Those are detoxifiers. Those are very needed because your liver can't, say, detoxify black widow venom kind of thing. But whenever you talk about like a detox diet, you're essentially saying my liver and my kidneys are not working, because those are the 2 organs you have that detox you, your liver and your kidneys. I guess maybe you would need a detox diet if those weren't working. Like if you had end-stage renal failure and cirrhosis of the liver, okay, I'll buy it. Okay, I'll give you that, lemon water and cayenne pepper deal. But again, not only do you see the major vascular system here, but with the gallbladder and this is our biliary duct here, this is also kind of the major hub we have, or one of the major hubs we have for our lymphatic system. So it carries in really like everything into it. On top of that, like I said, with your liver being a detoxifier, whenever you say drink alcohol, like drink ethanol, you don't digest it. You don't absorb the nutrients. There's no nutrients for you that are readily used from alcohol. You are quite literally consuming empty calories. The only way you break down alcohol is through the liver. You have to get the liver to metabolize that. Once that's metabolized, it then turns into fats or triglycerides that are immediately sent for storage. So to use the calories from alcohol takes a whole lot of doing. At the same time, you can actually slow down your metabolism by anywhere from like 5 to 20%, depending on how much booze you drink, because alcohol is going to naturally slow down your metabolism. Same thing like if you're talking about like medicines or drugs. If you ever look at a drug, and I'll even just throw something up here. Anybody have a drug they want to think of off the top of their head? Let's go with propranolol. That's a nice old one. And if we look at our nice little Wikipedia page here, so side note on Wikipedia, Wikipedia itself isn't recognized as a good, like source of information because it's whatever people edited. But if you use the references that they have, it's actually very, very helpful. Like one of the easiest things for you to do when you're doing like a lot of research is to search for that topic in Wikipedia and then go through the reference list there as really more of a true references to use. Now, some of these, like this here, I wouldn't, just even looking at the title of that, I wouldn't use a whole lot of that in my thing. But when you look at, say, granted this is dated, but you get the idea here. Comprehensive Review in Toxicology for Emergency Clinicians, 3rd edition. Yeah, that's probably a pretty solid reference there. But anyway.
I have a quick question about the assignment regarding references.
Yeah.
Do we need an article from the GCU library, or does it just need to be like educational or whatever the word for it is?
Any peer-reviewed article will work.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I use the GCU library as an example because that's going to be the easiest place for you to find one. Rule of thumb is peer-reviewed equals DOI. That's probably the easiest way to think of it. Please, 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 for the love of God, do not give me an article that has a checkout box in it. If I have an add to basket or add to order from your article, I'm giving you a 0. I'm not even going to read it. I don't care if it's Nobel Prize winning. You've been warned. I've actually had a lot of students in the past do that, where for some sort of like article review, not really so much in this class, but in other classes, they would give me essentially like a sales site kind of thing. I even had one student who tried to do a presentation on an illegal substance, like it was a banned drug, when we were talking about different medications or different medications or supplements that could be used for certain conditions, and they use this illegal substance, and I can't even get it, let alone would I want to use it, kind of thing. Anyway, back to this though. So this is propranolol. It's a beta blocker. Beta blockers are going to be heart medications typically used for blood pressure. They're going to suppress your heart rate. The lower your heart rate, typically the lower your blood pressure. If you are someone who has heart failure, taking a beta blocker will raise your aerobic capacity. If you are a normal person or someone without heart failure and you take a beta blocker, it will decrease your aerobic capacity because it's going to suppress your max heart rate. So imagine if you were running on a treadmill and normally your heart rate's at, let's say, 150 beats per minute when you're running. If you take a beta blocker, your max heart rate would be like in the 120s. So if you're working out at a rate where your heart rate needs to be much higher than what it is, you're going to fatigue very quickly. But here, this pharmacokinetic data and this piece here, metabolism. When you talk about something that is metabolized, it is broken down in the body. The liver is what is breaking this down. Yeah, you have some other different little channels here. You know, these different enzymes and proteins are going to help break that down. But at the same time, if you look, many of these are actually going to be, say, made in the liver. But point is, your liver is going to be the one that actually breaks down even like your drug react or your drugs themselves. Your hepatic vein eventually is going to turn into your inferior vena cava. All right, lymphatic system. This here is something that we can go in for days and days and talk about this, because it's part of the endocrine system and it's a very complex system. The main thing to know about this is that with the lymphatic system, it's essentially a separated system from your bloodstream, has its own, you know, it's like its own separate road kind of thing. It would almost be like your circulatory system is, say, the 17 and the 101 and the 202, all your main roads here. And then your lymphatic system would be like a subway kind of thing. Both of them are going to travel to potentially the same places, but you cannot get to one from the other. Like, I cannot go straight from driving down the 17 onto Camelback straight into the subway. Does not work. Not that we even have a subway, but you get the idea. Can't just drive my car straight into a subway train kind of thing. Your lymphatic system moves very slowly. And whenever lymph, which is the fluid you have in your lymphatic system, becomes, like, say, blocked or even a little bit coagulated, you'll get inflammation in a lymph node. This will also happen when you are feeling sick, especially with, like, say, your throat. Your tonsils are your major lymph nodes. So unless you had your tonsils removed, those are going to be major ones for you. Whenever you get sick, like you get a sore throat, your tonsils inflame because they are trying to shoot out more white blood cells to that given area to help fight off any of those pathogens. All right, the microbiome with our GI system. Microbiome is just all the bacteria you have in your intestines. How much do you think it weighs? So how much does all the bacteria weigh that is in the, or that are in these areas here? Stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Jocelyn, what's your guess?
Maybe like 5 to 10 pounds. I don't know.
It's not a terrible guess. You have roughly 6 to 12 pounds of bacteria in these three organs. So the bacteria you have in your stomach, your small intestine, and your large intestine are weighing you down by around about 6 to 12 pounds. Conversely, at any given time, unless you've taken, you know, a laxative lately, how much poop do you think you got in you? All right, Itzel, how about you?
I don't know. I would say 5 pounds.
Pretty close. 4 to 8 pounds, depending on how big your recent food baby was. So between poop and bacteria, you're having anywhere from roughly, let's say, 10 to 20 pounds in you. That's all stuff that isn't part of your true weight. Now, this is also why, like, say, when you get a stomach flu, you lose so much weight. It's not because of, like, say, a decrease in how much food you're eating. It's because you are stripping your body of most of its bacteria or its gut biome. Whenever you take antibiotics, it's going to kill most of this. Now, the good thing is that it grows back very readily. So it's not as though you're wiping it out and it's done. Because you need this bacteria to facilitate the extraction of nutrients in your body and also to compete and fight off against different bad bacteria or pathogens. If you look at this little bit here, this shows you in general a good versus bad bacteria. Now, some of these you don't think of as necessarily being good, like E. coli. You always hear about, like, you know, foods being essentially, I don't want to say poisoned, but like tainted with E. coli or something like that. Well, E. coli is actually a very, very common bacteria you have in your system. It's actually really good for you when it's in your, say, colon. It's not really good for you when it's, like, say, in your bloodstream. Like today, I was cleaning out, well, not really cleaning out, but I was taking the dirt from one of my plants that had died. So my watermelons, you know, gave me a couple melons, and then after they give you a melon, the vine dies, kind of thing. And there was a piece of Bermuda grass in it, in the pot. And I went, when I took all the soil out, that one, like, piece of grass that's, you know, this big or this long had roots that were this big. That's really, really awesome if that's in a lawn. That's really, really terrible when it's with other plants. Why?
Is it because it's stealing other nutrients from the plants?
Bingo. That's a bingo. So when you have roots, essentially, you are absorbing nutrients through those roots for the most part. Like if you're, like, say, a rhizome or a tuber, that's a different story. But anyway, something like that has an extensive root system, because grass really doesn't or isn't supposed to have extensive roots. Bermuda grass is one of the exceptions. It's awesome when it's in a lawn because it makes it virtually indestructible. It doesn't matter if you, like, just wipe that whole thing out, it's going to grow back. Terrible when it's with other plants, because that extensive root system will compete too heavily with other plants. E. coli, very good when you keep it in the colon. Very bad when it goes elsewhere, because it competes with other bacteria, and you don't want it to. Now, some of these other ones, like, you just never want. This stuff here, you don't ever want to deal with. Like a Campylobacter, those are no fun. That'll give you a lot of, like cramping and pain. Clostridium difficile, this is a huge problem in nursing homes. You may hear it by its colloquial name, C. diff. This essentially gives you your, you know, projectile diarrhea kind of thing. C. diff is a major killer in the senior population. And again, especially like in nursing homes where you have potentially a compromised immune system already. because it's a huge dehydrator. Whenever you have diarrhea, dehydrates you. And it's very, very hard to treat. The quickly becoming the standard of care is doing fecal transplants, where essentially you will take somebody's good poop and you will inject it into you like an enema kind of thing. And the good bacteria from a fecal donor will compete with C. diff and it takes it over. But C. diff itself is very, very difficult to treat via antibiotics because it's resistant to most of our frontline antibiotics. Now, when you see these different things, probiotics, prebiotics, what exactly do those do? Or where might you find these? What kinds of foods?
Would it be in kombucha?
Usually they are.
In yogurt?
In yogurt especially, yeah. Just like most everything in our bodies, bacteria have a very, very hard time surviving in very acidic conditions. Hence why you see bacteria per milliliter, 10 to the first power. 10 to the first power means 10. 10 bacteria per milliliter is like nothing, right? There's like no bacteria in the stomach. If you want to survive in the stomach, like you better have your, anti-everything suit on, because the acid in there is meant to kill everything. So you put those kinds of good bacteria, which again will not survive in the stomach, in huge quantities, and you put them into solutions that are slightly basic. Specifically, yogurts are a huge one because yogurt is dairy, dairy is basic. You put it, kombucha is it's more on the neutral side of things. But that will help at least some of them to survive through that, to then transport into the small intestine where hopefully they take off and grow and help you. If you were to just swallow like a mouthful of the straight up your good bacteria, they would all die. Once they hit the stomach, they would just die. Womp womp. This here's the main function you have with your good bacteria in terms of digestion. So helps to digest fiber and complex proteins. It's going to break down your bigger nutrients into smaller, more manageable ones. Also, by having so much good gut flora, again, it helps to protect you against pathogens. Imagine if, there's not that many of you, but let's say all 10 of us were in a classroom and one person runs in the classroom and tries to start beating us all up. If we all swarm them, what's the most likely cause or most likely end to that? So 10 of us try to take out one person.
We beat them up.
Most likely. Now, yes, several of you are probably going to get black eyes, maybe broken ribs, fractured nose or something. But the system as a whole is going to come out on the other side. That is the role of our good bacteria. All right. Don't worry about this right now. The major hormones that we talk about, we're going to cover later on in the term. The major hormones you're going to need to know is gastrin, secretin, and then cholecytokinin, or CCK. You'll also need to know leptin and ghrelin, and then you'll need to know glucagon, insulin. I think that's it. But yeah, don't worry about these so much right now. All right, feedback loops. This is something that is going to explain a whole lot of different, say, really just chemical processes in the body. So you have positive and negative feedback loops. If you have a negative feedback loop, what's happening here is that you have food in your stomach that's going to release this hormone gastrin. Gastrin is going to tell your stomach to give you hydrochloric acid or stomach acid. Stomach acid gets very low. The negative feedback there is that once that reaches the low point, so when that pH goes down and reaches this threshold, feedback kicks in and says, okay, we've reached 1.5, time to turn off the switch. If I had a positive feedback loop, we would turn on the switch at this. There's a lot more practicality to this, but again, it's just kind of one simple thing to keep in mind. All right, swallowing and choking. So now we get into kind of the more practical applications of all this stuff. When you swallow something, we talked about the epiglottis here. So the epiglottis, remember, is a leaf-like flap of cartilage that is attached here really to your top of your trachea, kind of the base of your tongue. And whenever you swallow, it closes. It allows food to leave from the mouth into the esophagus. When you swallow, the larynx itself is going to rise up. So your windpipe is actually going to rise up to help meet this because it's going to help form a seal. If the larynx didn't rise, my epiglottis would do this. And you see how that's problematic because now I don't have a seal. So with the larynx rising, it helps form that seal. What happens if you swallow essentially too fast before this can happen?
The substance you swallow will end up in your lungs.
I mean, hopefully not in your lungs, but usually it'll go or start to enter the trachea. Now, the trachea, and especially like once you get to, say, your pharynx, like around your windpipe, it's very hard to get through that. You'll start coughing pretty bad. That's why if something ever goes down the wrong pipe, you start coughing a whole lot, and you get that all out. For something to reach your lungs, you've had a lot go down there. And typically it's going to be a pseudo-solid kind of thing. When you're actually choking, choking occurs when solid food enters into the trachea and blocks it. The major problem with this is that it forms a complete seal. Like I said, when you look at your windpipe is pretty narrow. Or I'm sorry, not your windpipe, but your vocal cords. There we go. Your vocal cords form a pretty narrow flap. It's hard to get to bypass that, because how easy is it to say talk underwater? You could produce sounds, but you can't really produce any meaningful, words kind of thing. And it's because whenever you have fluid mixing, or like water mixing with sound or sound frequency, you distort it, because water is not a good carrier of that. So you have the least amount of fluids around your vocal cords, so that you have more of an appropriate medium, which is just air, to carry sounds through. Has to be rather narrow. If something gets into your trachea and it enters into the lungs, it's got to get through that. This is why you don't swallow, like, say, army men and get them into your lungs. The things that end up in your lungs are like a Lego piece, or something like vomit, something like that. If it's a pseudo liquid or a semi-solid, that's the ones that are going to get in there. When you start choking, a solid piece of foodstuff has formed a seal throughout your trachea, meaning you cannot get air in or out. That's why if someone's ever choking and they're making sounds, if you make sounds, you're coughing, anything like that, there's still airflow. You should have no intervention then. You should encourage them to keep coughing or keep trying to get something out or whatever. Where you are concerned is where they make no sounds. So a lack of sound or lack of air production is your sign of choking. I mean, pretty self-explanatory there, but all right, now we get into the good stuff here. So vomiting here. When you vomit, you are expelling contents of the stomach and the upper small intestine. There we go. I told you on Tuesday that you can you can expand your stomach to go round about 1.5 to about 1 gallon worth of space. So this is why, like, when you vomit, you can vomit like potentially a ton of stuff. When you're vomiting, unless you have like very recently swallowed solid food, it's going to come up as a semi-liquid mass. Because remember, when you start breaking down stuff chemically in the stomach, it turns semi-liquid. That's why when you vomit, you don't vomit up typically solid stuff. It is very difficult to get solid food back out of you. Now, you're doing this as a mechanism to try. You're essentially trying to get some sort of pathogen out of your body, or something that your body recognizes as being not supposed to be there. At least when you're talking about the just biological function of it. Now, when we talk about vomiting, that's when you're talking about expelling your stomach contents. When you talk about a regurgitation, this is an involuntary leave of absence kind of thing. A regurg or regurgitation is also a reflux. So when we talk about with heartburn, that's where you have your stomach acid going up through the esophagus because of a faulty esophageal sphincter. That is a regurgitation. regurgitation is involuntary. Vomiting, to somewhat of an extent, is voluntary. With regurgitation, you're not expelling anything. Even if you have heartburn, you feel that stomach acid climbing up, and it feels like it gets all the way into like the back of your throat, but there's nothing there really. You're not, say, like throwing up anything. When you vomit, you actually throw stuff up. You expel contents. The major immediate issue with vomiting is dehydration. So that's one of the major immediate problems you can have. When you are, say, talking about like aspiration. Aspiration is when you vomit and then breathe that vomit back in. So like that's how, say, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin both died. They died from heroin overdoses, or I'm sorry, they died from asphyxiation secondary to a heroin overdose. So if you're, gosh, I don't want to like tell you the proper way to take heroin, but if you're ever, say, like potentially overdosing on drugs, sounds horrible, but you want to make sure that you position your body so that you are either laying face down or on your side, because that way, if you do happen to vomit in your sleep, you won't asphyxiate it, or you're less likely to asphyxiate it. Conversely, if you are a baby, you carry a much higher rate of crushing your windpipe if you're sleeping on your belly or on your side. That's why you want to keep an infant, like a new infant, on their back, because it'll help to open up their windpipe. Self-induced, this is going to be either something where, say, like you felt sick and you make yourself throw up, or like something doesn't feel right and you just want to get it out kind of thing. Or you potentially have, like, say, an eating disorder, which we'll get into later on in the semester. Emetics, these are things that are going to make you throw up. Ipecac is the number one there. That's really not used anymore. It used to be that if people had thought they ingested a poison, they were told to drink Ipecac syrup, which would make them vomit. I don't know if any of you are Family Guy fans. There was an episode several years ago where the whole family drinks like a bottle of Ipecac, and it was for some competition they were doing, because the last person to vomit was going to be the one that won. And when you take Ipecac, it is going to essentially turn your life into just a nonstop vomit stream for quite some time. So not only if you ingested a poison, will it already be absorbed into your bloodstream, but then you can also cause a lot of extra problems if you use Ipecac on yourself. So not a good thing to do. All right, poop. Can't go to class without talking about poop, right? Your poop is actually really important, but not necessarily for the reason you would think. When you look at your poop, it's actually going to give you a good idea of your overall GI health. Obviously, the major concerns are if you see like blood in your stool, things like that. Diarrhea is not the greatest thing to have in the world. So if you ever have diarrhea, and I won't take a poll here, after a little while with diarrhea, things start kind of burning on the way out. And why do you think that would be?
Would it be because of the stomach acid?
Yeah, and why? So there's two things that happen when you have diarrhea. Typically, it takes about 24 to 48 hours to get food out of you. So next time you eat corn, mark your calendars and then count the amount of time it takes, or how much time it takes for you to get it out. When you have diarrhea, though, you can get that food stuff out of you. Like once it leaves the stomach, it can get out of you within like an hour or two. Super fast. Not enough time for bile to get properly mixed in to neutralize that. And obviously it's coming out, it's liquidy. Your colon's not reabsorbing a lot of the fluids there. So it is highly acidic. And that's why it hurts. Because your rectum is not prepared to deal with that. Plus, you also have a lot of vasculature in your anus. So hemorrhoids, if you have, well, everyone has hemorrhoids, but hemorrhoids internally are veins that help supply blood flow to the area and also help with expanding your anal sphincter, which is going to then allow you to actually have a bowel movement. Those don't like acid. It feels very unpleasant to them, and they can easily get inflamed from that. If you have things like, say, IBS, that's where you've had some sort of food stuff that is going to irritate your intestines to the point where it wants to just expel the food very quickly. Colitis is where you have inflammation in your colon. That's not a good thing. Celiac disease, this is where you have a essentially a severe allergy to gluten. The major thing when you are getting into these diarrheal stages is that you need to be rehydrating. That's one of the major things you want to look at there. Fun fact for any of you that have watched Frozen 2, wombats poop out squares. Whenever you see pellets kind of thing from yourself, it's not good. Other animals, it is good. So like rabbits, deer, they poop pellets. That's the natural thing they do, because their bodies, and for the most part, many types of woodland creatures are going to extract much more fluid out of their stools because they overall are going to consume less water than, say, us. So they want to hold on to more of that because it's a scarce resource. But for us, if you have very hard stools, it's a big signal that you're dehydrated. Constipation. If you've ever been constipated, it means you can't poop. One of the biggest causes of having constipation is going to be the use of like opioid medications. So if you use opioids or kind of painkillers, that can actually cause you to become constipated because it'll essentially paralyze your colon from functioning. Your colon works in like a wave. So it kind of flaps a little bit, and that helps to push any of the bolus through it and get it on out. If you have a painkiller, it's going to minimize that effect. So it makes it very, very difficult for you to move any stool through that. Like I said, hydration is going to be a big thing. The more fluids you consume, typically the less chances you have there. The more fiber you have in your body, it's going to help as well. Constipation can prove to be problematic if it's not treated. So if you had, say, chronic constipation, that can potentially back up your system. You'll see this in like sometimes hospice patients or who are on end of life care that will actually vomit back up poop because their entire intestinal system is blocked. And that's a very telling sign that the end is quite near. Elvis died from constipation. So yeah, he was, drug addict and all that, but he died of constipation. He used the Valsalva maneuver. So, holding your breath and trying to really push, used that on the toilet, gave himself a heart attack and died. Don't really want to do that. So it shouldn't be you shouldn't have to extremely strain to have a bowel movement. Like I said, the major thing to do is keep yourself hydrated. All right, talked about hemorrhoids here. Remember, hemorrhoids are just your veins that exist in and around your rectum. If you have external inflamed hemorrhoids, that's the ones that you need like preparation H for, that kind of thing. Diverticulitis is this. That's where you get actually kind of holes in your colon. And this is one of the major indicators of colon cancer. So if you have diverticulitis, you are in an exponentially increased risk of having colon cancer. The use of laxatives is not something that you should be doing unless for like certain situations. You should use laxatives if you're having, like, say, bouts of constipation that haven't been resolved from other more conservative means. You should also use laxatives in preparation for certain medical procedures such as a colonoscopy, because you want to try to get everything out of your colon so that usually the proctologist can actually see what's up in there. Have you ever heard of colonic irrigation? Good, you don't want to. So colonics, or any sort of colonic irrigation, means that you are essentially shooting saline water up your butt into your colon. This goes into around the same kind of practice as you would see with I mean, it's really kind of like a pseudoscience. It's not something that's really a good idea to do, because it can essentially paralyze your rectum if done enough times. But the immediate problem is that it can lead to colon swelling because you're introducing so much water into your colon. So like, have you ever had a clogged ear, like your ear's plugged with earwax, and you do an irrigation on it? You'll flush it out with water or with like a mixture of water and peroxide. That would be the same thing you do with your colon in an attempt to get all your poop out. And people sometimes do this as a means of, say, trying to detox themselves, and that's not a good idea. If your colon gets too much fluid in it and it swells up, it's essentially like a sponge that's completely saturated. It's really not a good thing, because you are making it virtually impossible to get any other fluids from digestion to be absorbed. So it can actually lead to, say, other bouts of like constipation. It can also make it very difficult to, say, maintain hydration. So you don't really want to be doing that. And then belching and gas. So whenever you burp, all that are the gases from your stomach leaving, because gas can escape through a sphincter. The sphincters aren't airtight. They're fluid tight, not airtight. So leaving that, and you burp up gas bubbles. Sometimes those gas bubbles can get coated in like stomach acid, so you can actually burp up, seemingly like a hydrochloric acid bubble. That's not fun, but it can happen. The more sugars you have, the more gas, or the more burping you'll have. Intestinal gas, same kind of thing. The higher your sugar content, the more farting you're going to do. And this here is just an example of what happens when you are mashing any sort of liquor. So in this jug will be a yeast and carbohydrate mixture. In its simplest form, you mix in water and sugar and throw in yeast, and the yeast eats the sugar and it produces carbon dioxide and ethanol. Well, carbon dioxide is going to bubble off because it's a gas, so that's why you'll see that there. That same thing to a very smaller extent is happening in your GI system. This is why also, but it's happening because these are the gases you produce are byproducts of really the gut biome or the bacteria in your stomach taking in or digesting nutrients and giving off waste products. That's why it doesn't smell good. Primarily, you're going to have a methane-ish mix of gases coming out, and methane doesn't smell all that great. But the more sugars you consume, the more gas you're going to have. Typically, burping is going to be something that happens as a result of air being displaced in your stomach. Farting is going to happen from a byproduct of sugar digestion. All right, we talked about reflux here kind of ad nauseum already. One thing, though, I do want to mention here is the use of antacids and whatnot. Talked about Barrett's esophagus already. Typically, when you are trying to control acid reflux, that is not GERD or GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, you want to be using an antacid, like your Tums, your Rolaids, things like that, something that's like chewable. Those primarily are a calcium carbonate or calcium bicarbonate type substance. It's kind of like flavored chalk is what you're eating because that'll neutralize stomach acid. If you're taking something that is an acid controller, like your Pepcid or your omeprazole is a big one, those are they're proton pump inhibitors, meaning that they are going to turn off your stomach's ability to produce stomach acid. Long term, that can be a very bad thing. They work really effectively. They really do help with stopping any sort of heartburn, but that comes at the expense of making it so you have a very difficult time digesting your food. So, well, there you all there. Ulcers, any sort of ulcer is just a breakdown in tissue. If you have a blister, that's an ulcer. You think of a blister, how does that feel when you rub up against it? Yeah, not good. When that same stuff happens in your stomach and you have stomach ulcers, those are going to be really something that's going to hurt a whole lot. It'll give you a lot of GI distress, and also tends to be an indicator that you have excessive stomach acid production. These can also introduce really bad bacteria elsewhere in your body, like an H. pylori bacteria that survives in stomach acid can actually get out of the stomach through an ulcer, which you don't want it to do because that will wreak havoc on your body. When we talk about, say, one of the major side effects of heavy alcoholism and bulimia is you can get esophageal ulcers. So you can essentially get a hole in your esophagus from continued vomiting and from also excessive alcohol consumption, excessive chronic alcohol consumption. One of the major problems you'll see with people who have diabetes is that they'll get foot ulcers or pressure ulcers. You may also hear the term bed sores. When you get bed sores or you get foot ulcers, it's typically the bottom of your foot. And when you get like a peripheral neuropathy where you can't feel the bottom of your feet, you would have no idea that you would have an injury there unless you were regularly checking them. Many people who have those tend to be obese, and it's a difficult thing to be able to look at the bottom of your foot. So doing that is one of the major reasons why you would have an amputation of your foot or other lower extremity as a result of diabetes. And then just some of your strategies to prevent or alleviate these, but kind of all stuff we really went over already. All right, so that is all the new material I have for you here. So what kind of questions do you all have for me? All right, so remember, next week we start live classes, and I posted on the class page, and I'll show you again if you haven't looked already. But posted in the announcements here, well, I hate that they only show 2 announcements. The live classes bit here, and this tells you exactly if you are showing up on Tuesday or if you're showing up on Thursday. So at some point between now and Tuesday morning, I will be posting in the announcements an activity for you to do when you're not in class. Look, I can't prevent you from being a Tuesday student who also does the Tuesday activity ahead of time from doing it, but it's supposed to be something to really make up for the fact that we're only having 1 live class a week kind of thing. I'm going to try to see if there's a way for me to record any of those classes. I do have my standalone microphone here that hopefully can work, but no guarantees on that. But again, same time, Tuesday, Thursday, 7 to 8:45, we're meeting in the National Science Building. So it's Building 6, room 403. That one is, that's the one right behind the engineering building, right? Yeah. So I believe this is actually like a pretty huge room, if I'm thinking of the correct room, because I know I've taught there before. So there really, I don't think there's any reason why not everyone should be able to show up, but whatever. It's the way the school wants to do it, and I'm not going to argue there. So U5, show up on Tuesday. U4, show up on Thursday. And that's about that.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So we are or are not logging into Zoom on our non-class day?
You're not.
Okay, cool.
Like I said, I'm going to try to record the live classes to post a recording for you, but I'm not guaranteeing that. So from now on, you're going to get essentially 1 live class per week and then a activity for out of class. But yeah, that's everything I have for you there. So if you guys don't have any more questions, you're all good to go, but I will stick around until you all leave, and I will see at least half of you here on Tuesday.
Thanks a lot. See you next week.
Okay, bye.
And then just like making sure the only thing that's due this week would be the nutrition article, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Nothing on, what is it, Cengage, I think?
No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.